Buyer's market, seller's market. Better for buyers, better for sellers. Better time to buy, better time to sell. What in the world is going on? These are all things we hear constantly, whether it be in the real estate field, like me working as a realtor, or as a seller, or as a buyer or an investor. What is really going on? What do these terms mean? How do we know what's what? So in this video, I'm going to clear that all up because honestly, even in my own field, talking to people that I know, I get different answers. One day I'll hear, it's a seller's market. The next day I hear it's a buyer's market. So what I'm going to do is break down exactly the definitions of each, what each looks like, and then I'm going to go into the nuances of the seller's and buyer's market and how it's not really always black and white like people make it out to be. But once again, I'm Noah Cochran, a real estate agent here in Columbia, Central Missouri area, just on here to provide as much information and value to folks who may be needing to research selling, buying the market, what's going on in the world right now. But without further ado, let's find out the differences between a seller's and buyer's market. So as I mentioned, I was just talking to an agent the other day who was saying, well, it's clearly a seller's market, right? But then I talked to another guy a couple weeks back that was saying how it looks more like a buyer's market. And you get into these discussions and you're like, so how are people framing what they mean by sellers and buyer's market? So to clear all that up for any folks who may be looking into this, let's start with the basic definitions of what a seller's market is. So in essence, in the fundamentals, what is a seller's market? How is that defined? What does that look like? Well, put very simply, a seller's market is one that is more advantageous for sellers because they have more power in some capacity. Now, what does that actually mean? What gives sellers more power? What gives sellers more power is simply the concept that we always go back to of supply and demand. If they have high supply and low demand, that does not give sellers power because there's too many sellers and not enough buyers. But if there's high demand and low supply, that gives sellers a lot more power because there's a lot more buyers, they have competition, bidding wars, sellers can demand much more. Now, what aspects and facets of the market drive supply and demand? So the two biggest things that impact supply and demand in the real estate market is mortgage rates and home prices / ease of purchase. So starting with mortgage rates, when we have low mortgage rates, what happens is it drives in a lot more buyers, right? We have a lot more buyers. People love to see those lower interest rates. They buy a lot more. That's what happened around 2020, 2021, though that was a little extreme. But even when we get down to say 5, 6% even, lower mortgage rates, a lot more buyers come in because they like those mortgage rates. Same with prices. If prices aren't going up steadily, or maybe there's an ease of purchase or some other thing impacting home purchase price or home building price, then more buyers will come in. Now, what does that do? That drives up demand, driving down supply. And once demand starts exceeding supply significantly, that creates a seller's market, meaning there is less inventory, sellers have more power. So what does that look like? More buyers, a lot more buyers than inventory mean more offers come in. When a lot more buyers and offers come in, sellers have a lot more power. They can demand higher prices. They can cause bidding wars. They can say, no, we don't want to pay any seller concessions. No, we don't want to pay closing costs. No, we don't want such and such contingency, or they can play offers off each other. And the more demand and buyers exceed inventory, the more power sellers are going to have. So sellers had a lot of power back in like the 2020 era when interest rates were super low and mortgage rates were super low, giving them a ton of power. Houses were selling for $50K plus over listing price, and with like no contingencies, no inspections, anything bought as is, on sight unseen sometimes. So those are the kinds of things that define a very, very strong seller's market. Now, as we go towards the middle, it'll be less and less like that, less and less power to the sellers, but they'll still have more negotiation power. We won't see them conceding a lot of things to the buyers. So again, to put it simply, a seller's market is one where the inventory is lower or significantly lower than the buyers and the demand is. And what drives that is low mortgage rates, low interest rates, and steady or lower price ranges and just ease of purchase. So what is a buyer's market? Well, you guessed it, it's the exact opposite. When inventory exceeds, and especially significantly exceeds demand, what happens is we have not a ton of buyers, but a good amount of inventory. It means houses are sitting on market. They're not getting a lot of offers. They're racking up days on market because, again, they don't have a lot of offers coming in. They're having to do concessions, pay a lot more closing costs, say yes to contingencies just to get offers to go through. They're having to decrease purchase price by often 10, 20K plus sometimes, depending on your price range. And it just lets buyers have a lot more say and power in the negotiations because if the seller has a house that's been on the market for 60 plus days, they need to sell and they don't have any good offers coming in. So whatever offer they get, they probably want to accept as long as it's not, extremely bad or something. Now, what drives buyers to be much lower than inventory or lower than inventory? Very simple. High mortgage rates, high interest rates, and higher prices or steadily increasing prices. So just to sum all that up, a seller's market is one where the inventory is under the demand, meaning demand exceeds inventory. There's more buyers than there is inventory, giving seller the power. This is driven by lower interest rates, which increases the amount of buyers that want to buy, and steady or lower home prices, or home prices that cost to build a home, etc., especially for new construction. For a buyer's market, it is one where the demand is under the supply, meaning supply exceeds demand, and the buyers thus have a lot more power because the sellers need to get their home sold and they're not getting a ton of offers. This is driven by high mortgage rates, high interest rates, steadily increasing prices, etc., driving down the amount of buyers. Now, having said all that, which again, a lot of folks maybe already know all that, but having said all that, what people really need to understand is that there is nuance in any given market. So if we're talking about Columbia market right now, in any given market, we can have a partly dissected or dichotomy of buyer and seller's market. So I'll explain. Here's what I mean. In the 200 or under 300K price range in Columbia right now, maybe under 350 depending on where you are, we are seeing a lot of buyers because people want to buy these cheaper homes. Maybe they can't afford the more expensive home because, home prices are just too high right now. Maybe the mortgage rates, interest rates are just too high on that expensive home. Their monthly payment will be too high, so they have to settle for a lower price home. That's why when I was showing homes just recently in the 250 price range, we had homes going off like that. Like they would go on the market and they would get bought in a week. So that means it's very hot. That means we have a lot of buyers and less inventory. So that market is clearly a seller's market. Sellers have the power. So when I was talking to that man a couple days ago at a meeting and he said, well, it's a seller's market, right? Probably what he was referring to is that lower echelon of price ranges, or maybe his specific area is very hot. That can be, there's pocket areas that can get very hot regardless of price range, but typically it's more to do with price range. So in Columbia right now, under 350, I would 100% call a seller's market. However, in the 350 to 400 plus price range, I'm actually seeing the exact opposite. Homes are sitting on the market for a significant amount of time. Average, I believe, is 50 to 60 days plus. Sometimes much more, depending on different factors. Maybe they're overpriced, maybe sometimes it's just how it is though, because these homes can't sell as fast because we have a lot more inventory in that price range than we have buyers. Why is that? Because buyers simply sometimes cannot afford that price range right now. Maybe they can't afford the monthly payment due to interest rates, etc., etc. So I would actually consider, and I've been talking to other folks in different states, different areas over the past several months, and we had all been talking about how it's a buyer's market because of these higher price ranges, higher interest rates. However, I can see why some folks will call it a seller's market, particularly in the lower half price range, under 400, under 350K. It is a seller's market because sellers have a lot more power because there's a lot more buyers that are having to buy in that price range. But again, just to clarify this, above 350, 400K, we are seeing a lot of inventory and not a ton of demand. And it's a pretty stark difference. Like I'm looking at a home just yesterday, 500K. Been on the market for a while, but it's a nice home, but it's been on the market for quite a while. Then I go look at a $250 home, $1,000 home, and market 1 week. It's pending, it's under contract already. So there's a very stark difference. Now, obviously, this is generalization. You'll go on the market, the MLS, you'll go on Zillow, you'll see this home's been on the market for 3 months and it costs $200,000. Well, there's other factors that can impact. There's location, there's quality, there's all kinds of factors that can impact this. But in a general sense, right now in Columbia, we have a seller's market in the under 300K. So if you want to sell your home right now in that price range, that's great. But if you're wanting to sell your home in the higher price range, you have to keep in mind that you may run into some difficulties. You may need more marketing. It might be harder to sell on your own if you're trying to do for sale by owner, depending on different factors. You might just need more outreach marketing to get more people to notice the home and that way sell the home faster and avoid racking up too many days on market. So these are things that we just have to keep in mind. And I just wanted to quickly go over that. The buyers, the seller's market, what really is it? What's happening? Because we hear so many different things. I hope that made sense for the most part. Now, none of this means you shouldn't buy or you shouldn't sell. It's just general information. Generally right now, it is more advantageous for buyers in the higher price ranges who can't afford it because they're able to demand more off sellers. And it's more generally advantageous for sellers in the lower price ranges because they're able to demand more off buyers. That's a very vague generalization, but that is generally true in what I'm seeing. If we're seeing cash offers overnight, first day for a home that goes on sale in the 200 to 250 price range, and then we see a 450 home that sits in the market for 57 days before it gets its first offer, you can see the stark difference there. Not to say the homes up there are not selling. They're definitely selling up there as well, especially with agents or folks who are doing a good job marketing that home, showing off its advantageous aspects and getting out in front of a lot of people. But this video is too long, folks. Again, I'm Noah, agent here, just trying to provide a lot of value and content. If you would ever like more information about this, about what's going on in the world, this market, whatever, feel free to reach out to me, get my number, get my email, show up out of nowhere. I would love to be of assistance. And until next time, folks, you have a good one.